This is the story of a multi-billion-dollar industrial gamble that just met the cold reality of the North American market. In the quiet corridors of Ontario's manufacturing heartland, a sudden silence has fallen over one of the most ambitious automotive projects in national history. On October 21st, 2025, General Motors officially confirmed the end of production for the Bright Drop electric delivery van at its CAMI assembly plant in Ingersoll. This was not merely a temporary pause or a scheduling conflict. It was a total shutdown of the production line that once represented Canada's first full-scale EV manufacturing success. The decision serves as a sharp, data-backed correction to the optimism that defined the Canadian economic strategy just 24 months ago. While billions in taxpayer-funded subsidies remain on the ledger, the physical assembly lines have been forced into a permanent retreat. What began as a guaranteed pivot toward a zero-emission logistics future has transformed into a high-stakes case study in market misalignment. The Ingersoll facility now stands as a primary friction point between aggressive government mandates and a cooling consumer reality. This shutdown signals a cooling period that many analysts believe will redefine the northern automotive landscape for the next decade. The urgency here isn't found in a sudden collapse, but in the quiet realization that the infrastructure for the future was built on a foundation of shifting sand. As the heavy machinery stops, a deeper question emerges about who actually controls the speed of the global energy transition. This shift represents a broader recalculation that the public was never told to expect. To understand why a titan like General Motors would abandon a flagship project, we must look at the hidden mechanics of industrial psychology and state-level economics. The math seems simple in 2022. The Canadian and Ontario governments each injected $259 million into the CAMI plant, totaling a $518 million public-private partnership. The goal was to secure a monopoly on the electric delivery market through the Bright Drop Zevo models. However, the mechanism of growth hit an unexpected ceiling. High interest rates have fundamentally altered the fleet buying calculus for logistics giants, turning what was once an easy upgrade into a prohibitive capital expense. By late 2025, the market share for battery electric vehicles in Canada plummeted to just 5.5%, a drop of more than half from the previous year. Furthermore, the volatility of the global battery supply chain and the elimination of key tax credits in the United States have made the business case unsustainable. The Canadian federal mandate, which requires 100% of new light-duty vehicle sales to be zero-emission by 2035, is now under review as it creates a regulatory pressure cooker. Manufacturers are being pushed by policy to produce at a volume that the current national charging grid and consumer demand are physically incapable of supporting. When the government moves faster than the power lines can be buried, the result is a massive accumulation of unsold inventory and a forced cessation of capital flow. GM's decision is an act of institutional self-preservation against a policy framework that ignored the signals of the open market. But as the gates at Ingersoll close, the global context reveals that Canada isn't the only nation facing this specific brand of industrial paralysis. Across the globe, the mines-to-mobility dream is encountering a similar set of historical and economic parallels. In Europe and the United States, legacy automakers are dismantling their aggressive mid-decade EV targets, citing the same sluggish adoption rates seen in Ontario. Canada, however, occupies a uniquely vulnerable position due to the sheer scale of its $30 billion subsidy commitment to the battery sector. When a cornerstone player like General Motors cancels a project, it triggers a ripple effect through a supply chain that was calibrated for a high-velocity rollout. Parts suppliers in southern Ontario now face a period of forced stagnation. Historically, industrial shifts of this magnitude take decades, yet modern policy attempted to condense that timeline into a single business cycle. This is a classic case of policy-induced market distortion, where the lure of subsidies creates a facade of demand that vanishes the moment the real-world utility is tested. The international market is currently choosing a hybrid middle ground, a trend confirmed by 2025 data showing full hybrids surpassing the entire zero-emission segment in market share. As Washington begins to fluctuate on its own green energy incentives and imposes new tariffs, Ottawa finds its industrial ambitions tethered to a North American trade bloc that is suddenly prioritizing fiscal discipline over environmental speed. This misalignment suggests that the all-in approach may have underestimated the durability of existing fuel architectures. The deeper truth is that the global supply chain is not a machine that can be switched on with a signature. It is an organic system that is currently rejecting the pace of the transplant. The real-world impact of this shutdown reaches far beyond the balance sheets of corporate executives and into the living rooms of the Canadian workforce. For the 200 workers at the CAMI plant, the shift from high-growth expectations to indefinite layoff creates an atmosphere of profound economic anxiety. While GM maintains its overall commitment to Canada, the failure to meet government deadlines for a new plant strategy suggests a new era of capital discipline that prioritizes survival over innovation. This disciplined approach means that the massive government incentives, once viewed as a guaranteed catalyst for prosperity, are now being analyzed with a newfound skepticism by private lenders. If the public sector cannot guarantee a corresponding increase in consumer demand and reliable infrastructure, the return on these multi-billion-dollar public investments remains mathematically questionable. The St. Thomas and Ingersoll regions, once heralded as the future EV capitals of the North, must now contend with a fragmented and slower industrial evolution. This reversal is a stark reminder that while industrial policy can build a factory, it cannot manufacture a customer base that isn't ready to buy. As we approach the 2030 benchmark, the events at the CAMI plant suggest that the path to a zero-emission future will be far more erratic and expensive than the initial brochures promised. The media focuses on the technology, but the real story is the silent breakdown of the consensus between the state, the manufacturer, and the consumer. Because while the world is focused on the delay of the electric vehicle, the real transformation is already unfolding in the way nations are quietly retreating from the very mandates they swore to uphold, and the true shift is happening in a market segment the world is completely ignoring.